This is Nathan Smith, Fresno Pacific University, Economics in Business for degree completion students, slides from Chapter 9. So this is about market structure and pricing practices. Now, first of all, we'll look at different kinds of market structure. Perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. Generally, perfect competition up here at the top is the most competitive. Monopolistic competition and oligopoly are somewhere in between. Hard to say which of those is more competitive. You can't compare them directly, but then monopoly is, of course, the least competitive market structure. And so characteristics of perfect competition: there's many buyers and sellers. Buyers and sellers are price takers. The product is homogeneous, perfect mobility of resources. Let's back up and explain some of this. Price takers means that a given firm or individual has no control over the price. So the price is set in the market, quote. In practice, of course, you'll never quite get this. Somebody has to set the price. But the people who set the price may be under very tight constraints. Maybe a situation where if they raise the price a little bit, they lose almost all their market share or all but their market share. If they lower it a little bit, then they wouldn't be able to cover their costs, so they may have no choice really about the price which they would take. Or it might be that they can sell all they want at the market price, so there's no reason for them to lower the price. So the price is somehow set in the market. Again, you can think of this as sort of an abstract model, which is easy to theorize about. Does it apply to the real world? Never perfectly, but it often yields a good deal of insight. So the product is homogeneous. We ignore different brands, for example. In the case of something like deodorant, possibly you could analyze it as monopolistic competition because everybody has their own brand. But if you figure the differences between the brands aren't very important, then maybe you could analyze it as perfect competition. Economic agents have perfect knowledge. Hard to say how essential this one is, but at least it simplifies things to assume they have perfect knowledge. And I mean, of course, to some extent they do. They have to know the prices. That's the key. You can't have anybody in the market who is buying a good for a lot cheaper than they could buy it, because for a lot more expensive than they could buy it, because they're not aware of the better deal, or who's selling it for a lot less than they might be able to sell it for because they don't know that there's a better price available somewhere else. So that's basically what's meant by perfect knowledge. In that sense, perfect knowledge and price taking are actually closely related. The stock market, in some ways, is a good example of perfect competition. Mainly just because this seems to be a case where nobody has any pricing power. There's just such an enormous number of buyers and sellers that each individual who comes into the market doesn't have any influence over the price. Monopolistic competition. We're going to go over all of the sort of types of market structure first, an overview, and then we'll go into more detail about each one. Monopolistic competition, you have many buyers and sellers again, but it's different from perfect competition because you have differentiated products. So I mentioned the example of deodorant a moment ago. Here, if you think the differences between the products are important, you could model it as monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition sounds a little bit like a paradox, because monopoly and competition are opposites. But what this means is that you're a monopolist in one way. You're a monopolist of a particular brand. You're the only one who's selling your own type of differentiated product. But at the same time, you're in competition with other brands that are pretty close substitutes for your brand. Not perfect substitutes, but pretty close substitutes. So, also, resources can move. Capital, labor can move. And a lot of times this will be done so that new brands can constantly be being introduced. So so this is important because it causes profits to be competed away. Anyway, we'll go into more detail about that later. But so fast food outlets could be an example here. McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's. They're selling differentiated products. A Whopper's not quite the same as a Big Mac. I don't even remember what Wendy's one is, but they're pretty similar. So people who are going to dinner might just think of them kind of in a category and decide which one they want. Partly based on price, partly maybe based on their own taste. Oligopoly. This will often be modeled with this one. In some ways, it has the least satisfactory models. So you might consider the product homogeneous or differentiated. This is the idea where there are few sellers. So in contrast with monopolistic competition, you could say there's many sellers, oligopoly few. But where is exactly the cutoff between many and few? That's not very important. The theory doesn't really tell us that exactly. And a lot of times oligopolists, they may be dealing in a homogeneous product. So that's the difference between monopolistic competition and oligopoly. Let's say the models of oligopoly usually deal with a homogeneous product. And so, and some kind of barriers to resource and mobility. That can be another difference. Not that easy to move capital, not that easy to move labor. Automobile manufacturers could be an example of this. But again, I don't think there's a really clear distinction between these two, honestly. It's more that at the theoretical level we have different models of them, because certainly automobile, branding is important there too. But okay, so monopoly, this is a clear case, very well defined. You've got many buyers, but there's only one seller. So notice we have many buyers in all of these cases. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what went wrong there. Okay, we have many buyers in all the cases. So the difference is we're interested in the market structure on the supply side. You could have models with only one buyer too. Actually, that could be important. Sometimes you might be managing a company that has just one big customer, and then you've got to worry about a totally different set of. Usually, you don't want to be in that situation. You probably want to diversify your customer base, but so we're not really considering those cases here. We're just looking at cases where there's many buyers and there's different market structures on the supply side. But so in the case of monopoly, there's no close substitutes. PG&E is an example. You pretty much there's no substitute for electricity really. I guess you get your own generator or solar power or something, but mostly you kind of have to do business with them. Now, and in this case, there would be some kind of barriers to resource mobility. It's a little tricky to say what that means, but here's some examples. Control of an essential input. So if you own all the aluminum mines in the United States, then you're a monopolist. Well, actually, it wouldn't be now because there's international trade, but if you own all the aluminum mines in the world, then you'd be a monopolist. Patents and copyrights. So if you have a patent on a particular invention, nobody else is allowed to make it, you're a monopolist. Economies of scale, I mentioned PG&E. It's just not efficient to have multiple firms running wires to your house. So if you're in that business, you're pretty much a monopolist automatically. And the post office might seem like another example of natural monopoly, but actually you could easily have a lot of different firms delivering mail to your house. It might be kind of inefficient because because if somebody's going to make a trip to your house, maybe it's better for them to have everything that's delivered to you. But this is actually a case where you have a government franchise. The government sort of guarantees the post office a monopoly. So those could be reasons for monopoly. Monopoly per se isn't that common, but it's useful analytically because it sheds light on other situations as well. But we'll get into that more later. Okay, so these two charts key to a perfectly competitive market. So we've got demand and supply. You're plenty familiar with this. These letters, I think, become important later. But for now, the main thing we want to look at is, you notice that for the market, demand is downward sloping and supply is upward sloping. Actually, the key is demand for us. For the firm, demand is flat. So flat demand means there's no substitutes. Only demand is as much as you want to sell, provided you're willing to sell it at the going price. You can sell as much as you want at the going price, but you can't get anyone to take it for any more than that. And I guess if you were willing to offer it for less, you could sell an infinite amount, but there's no reason you would do that because you can sell an infinite amount at the market price too. So, and the fact, when I say it's an infinite amount, obviously no market is really like that. There's never infinite demand. That's why perfect competition is sort of an idealized abstraction, but it's analytically useful because sometimes maybe you can sell as much as you can possibly make and a lot more, even if it isn't an infinite amount. So agricultural markets are actually a good example of perfect competition because it tends to be a case where you produce corn, there's way more demand for corn than you'll ever be able to sell. You can't affect the market price there. Okay, so price determination, we see it graphically here. It's the intersection of the demand and supply curves. We can also look at it algebraically, and here we have the demand curve stated as an equation, so quantity demanded equals 625 minus 5p, p being the price, of course. And then we've got the supply curve stated as QS equals 175 plus 5p. Equilibrium is where quantity demanded and quantity supplied are the same. And so, to determine that, we just set the two equal to each other. So then 10 times the price equals 450. This is just when you move the 5p over here and move the 175 over there and subtract. You get that. You get the price $450. Then you can plug that into the demand and supply curves. You get 400 in both places. So this is an algebraic solution of price determination in a perfectly competitive market. Okay, so the firm's demand curve is equal to the market price. So remember, it's a flat demand curve at the market price. This is equal to marginal revenue as well. Why is market price equal to marginal revenue? Well, remember, the reason marginal revenue was lower than the price in some of the other models we looked at is because the demand curve was downward sloping. So in order to sell the last unit, you have to lower your price. But in a perfectly competitive market, that's not true. Marginal revenue is simply, what's the market price? That's how much you can earn by selling one more unit. It doesn't affect the price at which you can sell all the other units that you're selling. So, the firm's supply curve is going to equal marginal cost. So remember, the supply curve is the quantity the firm is willing to supply for a given price. And if the firm is maximizing profits, they'll choose the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So, and marginal cost is now equal to the market price. So, you do have to take this into account where marginal cost is greater than average variable cost, because if it's less, then it means the firm won't be worth the firm's while to supply at all. But provided that it's more, then whatever the firm's marginal cost is for a given quantity, that's the price that will be needed to evoke that. It's probably hard to make that clear just with a verbal argument, but yeah, this might help. Okay, here we have a marginal cost curve. We have the demand curve. We have two demand curves, one here, one here. We'll talk about now let's focus on this chart. We have average total cost, which is not exactly relevant to the firm's decision, but it's relevant to the result. The firm picks marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So you notice if it was producing more, it'd be spending more than it was making, so that wouldn't be worth it. So if it was producing less, it would have an opportunity to earn more on the last unit than it could sell. This is the point at equilibrium where it's maximizing its profits. So, well, if you look at what is average total cost at that point, and then you compare the difference between these two, you see average total cost is less than the market price, so the firm is actually making profits in this case. So then, okay, this is a different scenario. Here D is lower, you've got D prime down here. The firm again picks marginal cost equals marginal revenue. It ends up at this point E prime, so instead of E prime, E means the equilibrium. But in this case, average total cost is higher. So average total cost is actually the same, I think, of these two charts. That the point is that that the thing that's changed is that demand has fallen. You notice that now, if you look at average total cost at this equilibrium point, then average total cost is greater than the market price, so the firm is actually going to lose money on this deal. So the firm's taking a loss. Why would it bother to keep producing if it's taking a loss? Well, if you look down here at average variable cost is lower, so it's incurring some fixed costs. In this case, we're thinking of the fixed cost as being sunk cost, so it actually doesn't have a choice about whether to take the fixed cost. So, given that it's incurred the fixed cost anyway, then it's worth producing as long as it can earn more than its variable cost. So it's taking a loss overall, but at least it's reducing its losses relative to what it would be losing if it just shut down production. H is the shutdown point. So if demand were as low as this, then the firm would start to think maybe it's worth shutting down, even if we lose our fixed costs. So, consequence of a change in demand on a perfectly competitive firm. So, okay, now we want to move to long-run equilibrium. And so the difference in long-run equilibrium is we assume that entry and exit will guarantee that nobody's making any economic profit. So, the firm is always going to set price is equal to marginal cost. That's what they'll do in the short run. But now, average total cost will be the same as that. So this is the assumption that if average total cost is more than marginal cost, then they'll be making profits. If it's less, they'll be losing money. But in the long run, then entry and exit will eliminate profits and losses, and so average cost will be equal to total cost. So economic profit is 0, and this shows it graphically. So what's the difference between these curves and this curve? Mainly, well, for one thing, we've drawn these long-run average cost curve. So that makes some difference in long-run marginal cost, short-run marginal cost. Notice they all converge at this point because this is an equilibrium, and so the idea is here that in the short run you don't have as much flexibility to vary some of your factors of production, particularly capital, for example. So the curve is a little bit less favorable compared to the long run, when you can adjust your capital to whatever scale of production you want. But since we're in equilibrium, all these intersect here at this point, and So this describes it, and the price is equal. It's right at the low point of long run average cost. It's right at the point of tangency here. Because competition is basically going to ensure that entry and exit are going to push it in that direction. Okay, so now if we want to think about competition, this is sort of a new segment. In fact, actually, I think I'll do it in a new video.